The trunk of the tree, in the center here, is made up of the spinal cord and the brain. And this together is what we call the central nervous system, or CNS. So the nervous system has two parts, the central core, the CNS, and the peripheral nervous system, the PNS. And the PNS is involved in carrying sensory signals into the central nervous system, carrying motor signals to the muscles outside to the central nervous system. Now, at this level, there's some very important characteristics of the structure that can be seen. That the nervous system is one single structure, all of whose parts are in physical contact with each other. What do we call such a structure?
Homogeneous.
My first lecture? It's a network. The nervous system is one big network. There is no part of the nervous system that stands by itself in any part of the body. It's all interconnected. It's one big structure. And the other thing that we can see at this level of analysis is that it is bilaterally symmetrical. That means that the left side is the mirror image of the right side. Not like the heart, which we only have one of, and it's on the left side. Okay? Bilaterally symmetrical. We have two of everything in the nervous system. Now, if we look at the central nervous system, one of the central structures that we see is this wrinkled structure called the cerebral cortex. Okay? And you have a left cerebral cortex and you have a right cerebral cortex. Now, the cerebral cortex, it's all wrinkly. But if we were to take off the cerebral cortex and flatten it out, it would produce a sheet of tissue that's about 20 inches by 20 inches. There's your cerebral cortex. How do you get this to fit inside your skull?
Urine.
It fits. Look at that structure. It's not too different from the picture. It's all wrinkly. It's all folded up. Why do you think it's all wrinkly and all folded up?
Surface area.
Otherwise it wouldn't fit, which means it must be very important to have as much cerebral cortex in your head as possible. In other words, and we will see this in a lot more detail next time, lots of our human specific mental abilities are found in the cerebral cortex, where we want to have as much of them as possible. Now, how are we going to look? I mean, this is what you see. So far, we've looked at the nervous system with the naked eye from beyond. We just see it, the whole system. How are we going to see what's inside the nervous system? How do we get some information about the internal structures of the brain? Well, one thing we can do is take a head and slice it. You know, like you're making a sandwich or something. You make a nice thin slice and look what you see. Okay, this is an example of histological techniques. Probably talked about these in labs, how you make sections through a tissue. And let's see what you see when you look at the brain, when you take slices through the brain. Well, one thing you see is that, look at this. There's parts of the brain that seem to be hollow, filled with fluid. The brain is not solid. Okay, it's derived from a hollow tube. There are spaces in the brain where fluid can move through it. There also appears to be two types of nervous tissue, gray matter and white matter. You can see the gray matter that outlines the entire brain. That is the cerebral cortex. This is that thin layer of gray matter that surrounds the brain. The white matter that fills the other parts is very different, and there's also gray matter inside the brain. Now you can take structures like this and reconstruct a 3D picture of what the brain looks like. Now, one disadvantage of this whole approach here is that, unfortunately, this person has to be dead before we can look at the structure of their brain. That's not helpful. What if someone has a head injury or severe headaches, and you want to know what's changed in the structure of the brain? You don't want to have to take a slice through their head to look at the structure of the brain. It is nice to have what's called a non-invasive technique for looking at brain structure. And fortunately, we have those. One of them is called a CAT scan. How many of you have had a CAT scan? Many of you probably had. CAT scan is just a very fancy X-ray technique. Very fancy X-ray technique. You stick your head inside this machine, you're lying down, and what this machine does is literally take thousands of X-ray images at the time. This thing moves around, thousands of X-ray images. And the data is collected by a computer, and there is software that enables you to construct a 3D picture of the brain. Another technique for seeing internal brain structures are MRI, or magnetic resonance imaging. How many of you have had an MRI? Very common these days. This again, those of you who've had it, you stick your head into a giant machine with a huge magnet, and we won't go into details of it, but a huge amount of computer analysis, and it prints out a beautiful picture of your brain, just as good as a slice through the brain. Okay, we will continue next time, and I want you to think about